Rain swept across Peoria in thin, uneven lines, tapping softly against the smudged window of the Sutton apartment. Rachel Sutton stood there for a long moment, her fingertips pressed lightly to the cool glass. The late afternoon sky was a flat, exhausted gray, the same color her life had slowly taken on over the past year. Inside, the air felt heavy and stale, thick with the lingering scent of old medicine and damp laundry that never seemed to dry in the cramped space. Behind her, the quiet rasp of shallow breathing filled the room. Her mother lay curled beneath a faded blanket, her once strong frame now reduced to frail angles and trembling hands. A year of worsening illness had drained the life from her, leaving only exhaustion and a soft, apologetic smile she no longer had the strength to maintain. Rachel forced a brighter expression as she turned toward her, the muscle memory of pretending she was fine guiding her face into something gentle. She had spent months perfecting that mask, her way of keeping fear from leaking into the spaces her mother could still see. But today, under the weight of the rain and the endless ache of helplessness, the mask felt brittle. She moved quietly through the tiny apartment, careful not to disturb the fragile peace of the moment. The kitchenette was barely a few steps from the bed, but every movement, opening a cabinet, filling the kettle, searching for the last clean mug, felt like wading through mud. Steam drifted upward as she prepared tea, the warmth settling briefly against her cold fingers. "How are you feeling?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. Her mother nodded weakly, her gaze unfocused. Rachel set the cup on the bedside table and tucked the blanket closer around her shoulders, wishing she could offer something stronger than lukewarm comfort. In the narrow hallway, the old wall clock ticked with an almost aggressive precision. Each second felt like a reminder. Time was moving, but solutions were not. The front door opened with a soft creak. Rachel straightened instinctively, sensing tension before she even saw him. Her father stepped inside, shaking droplets from his jacket, his face drained of color. His hands trembled as he pushed the door closed behind him. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't need to. The fear in his eyes told her everything. The dread she'd been trying to outrun had finally caught up with them. He lingered by the doorway, unable to move or speak, as if the simple act of forming words would break him. The ticking clock grew louder, filling the silence until it felt like a pulse pounding against the walls. "Dad!" Rachel whispered. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the weight he carried was unmistakable. Something terrible had happened, something that would change everything again, in ways she wasn't sure she had the strength to face. The rain kept falling outside, steady and indifferent, as the room held its breath, waiting for his voice to return. The silence that followed felt heavier than the humid air clinging to the apartment walls. Rachel waited, her heart thudding in a slow, painful rhythm. Her father finally lowered himself into the worn kitchen chair, the legs scraping the linoleum with a sound that made her flinch. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders sagging in a way she had never seen before. "It's about the money," he said at last, his voice gravelly and thin. "The loan, the one I took 3 months ago." Rachel's breath caught. She remembered that day clearly, the way he had come home clutching a thick envelope of cash, insisting they finally had enough to cover her mother's tests, medications, and emergency appointments. She remembered how relieved he had looked, how her mother had cried into her hands, whispering thank you over and over. They all knew it wasn't a bank loan, but they were desperate, and desperation didn't leave room for better choices. Her father rubbed his temples, eyes squeezed shut. "They came back today. The lender's men. They want everything returned. Not just the principal. The interest too." Rachel gripped the edge of the counter. "How much?" His silence was answer enough. Finally, he forced the words out. "We have 1 week. If we don't pay, they'll take the apartment." He swallowed hard. They said they could start the process tomorrow if they wanted to. The room tilted slightly. Rachel felt as though the floor beneath her shoes had dissolved, leaving her suspended in uncertainty. A week. 1 week to repay an amount none of them could possibly gather. Not when every dollar they had was being poured into painkillers, inhalers, and specialist visits. Her mother let out a choked sob from the bed. Rachel turned just in time to see her cover her face with trembling hands, her thin shoulders shaking under the blanket. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I told your father we had no choice. I said we should take the money. I should never have." "Mom!" Rachel knelt beside her, reaching for her hands. "Don't say that. Please don't." But her mother couldn't stop. The guilt came pouring out, about the bills, about the pressure, about the weight she felt she had placed on her husband and daughter. The kind of guilt that grew slowly over months until it shaped every thought, every breath. Her father stared at the cracked tile floor, unable to look at either of them. "I thought I could handle it," he said quietly. "I thought we'd figure it out before they ever came back." Rachel wished she could find the right words, something strong enough to anchor them. But all she felt was the crushing realization that their problems were no longer creeping toward them. They were already at the doorstep, demanding payment. And the ticking clock on the wall kept moving forward, steady and unforgiving, marking the time they no longer had. Her father hesitated before speaking, as though the words themselves were too heavy to lift. He clasped his hands together, squeezing until his knuckles turned white. When he finally met Rachel's eyes, there was something broken in his expression, something that warned her the next sentence would change everything. There was another option," he said quietly. "An alternative they offered." Rachel felt her stomach tighten. What kind of alternative? Her father swallowed hard, his gaze drifting toward the window, as if he hoped the rain might somehow wash the truth away. "The man who runs the lending outfit, he saw you once. Months ago when he came by to check on the apartment. He remembered you." His voice cracked. "He said that if you agree to marry him, the entire debt disappears." For a heartbeat, Rachel couldn't breathe. The words didn't make sense at first. They hovered in the air like something absurd, something meant for a different world. But then the meaning sank in, rooting itself in her chest like ice. "Marry him," she whispered. "Dad, he's nearly 60. Her father nodded, shame bending his shoulders. "I know." Her mother tried to sit up, panic lighting her weak eyes. "No, absolutely not. She's our daughter, not a bargaining chip. And what choice do we have?" Her father replied, his voice fraying with frustration and despair. "We're out of time, out of money. The hospital is calling again for payment. The rent is late. The prescriptions, don't say it." Her mother's voice broke. "I would rather lose this apartment than lose her." Rachel stood frozen, her pulse echoing in her ears. Ophthalmologist bills were stacked on the kitchen counter, every envelope stamped in red. The medication copays had doubled. The last specialist visit had nearly wiped out what little savings they had. Every day felt like fighting a tide that kept rising, no matter how desperately they bailed out water. Her father looked at her with pleading eyes. "Rachel, I don't want this for you. Your mother doesn't want this. But they're threatening to take everything, and we can't borrow from anyone else. I have nothing left." Rachel turned away, gripping the back of a chair to steady herself. She wanted to scream, to run into the rain, to find a doorway out of this nightmare. But the reality was merciless. Without help, her mother's treatments would stop. Without the apartment, her mother wouldn't survive the winter. Later that night, long after her parents had fallen into restless sleep, Rachel sat alone in the dark, listening to the roof drip steadily with each passing hour. She thought about the man she had never spoken to, the man who wanted her as payment. She thought about her mother's labored breathing, her father's trembling hands, the bills that kept arriving. By dawn, after a night stripped of rest or hope, she made her decision. She would agree. Not for herself, never for herself, but because saving them was the only choice she had left. The car sent for Rachel arrived just after sunrise, a sleek black sedan that looked painfully out of place in the cracked parking lot outside her apartment building. She hesitated before opening the door, taking one last look at the life she was leaving behind. Peeling paint, rusted stair rails, the smell of damp concrete. Then she climbed inside, hands folded tightly in her lap, as the driver pulled away. The farther they drove, the more the landscape changed. Worn neighborhoods gave way to clean sidewalks, sprawling lawns, and quiet streets lined with old-growth trees. By the time they reached Lake Forest, the world around her felt impossibly distant from the one she knew. Lancaster Manor appeared at the end of a long, winding driveway, its stone facade rising behind a curtain of towering oaks. It looked like a relic from another century, grand, imposing, and untouched by time. The front doors were taller than any she had ever seen, accented by wrought iron details that cast sharp shadows across the steps. The place was beautiful, but something about it left her cold. Inside, the air shifted from cool morning breeze to a polished stillness that felt almost staged. Every surface gleamed, marble floors, heavy wooden banisters, and chandeliers that caught the light like frozen water. Yet the house itself felt strangely hollow, as if all the warmth had been drained from its walls long ago. A man stood near the base of the staircase, leaning slightly on a cane. Henry Lancaster. His presence was quieter than she expected, less intimidating than the idea of him had been. He was tall but stooped, his shoulders pulled inward as though trying to conserve what energy he had left. An oxygen cannula rested against his cheeks, the thin tubes disappearing behind his ears. "Rachel," he greeted softly, his voice strained but sincere. "Thank you for coming." She nodded, unsure how to respond. Up close, he looked even more fragile than she'd imagined. His skin was pale, his movements deliberate and slow, each step measured to avoid losing balance. There was a gentleness in his eyes, something tired but not unkind. And because of that, the guilt she carried pressed a little harder against her ribs. 2 staff members appeared almost immediately, one offering Henry a glass of water, another adjusting the oxygen tubing with delicate care. Their behavior bordered on exaggerated, their movements too cautious, too rehearsed. It was as if they were afraid he might break. Henry noticed her confusion. "They worry," he said quietly. "More than they should." Rachel offered a polite smile, though unease continued to twist low in her stomach. She followed him through the foyer, her footsteps echoing across the marble. The house felt colder the deeper they walked, not in temperature but in spirit. She had come here believing she understood what she was sacrificing. But now, surrounded by the quiet grandeur of Lancaster Manor, a new reality settled in. She was stepping into a life she didn't choose, tied to a man she barely knew. Inside a home that held more secrets than comfort. And something about that realization felt undeniably wrong. The wedding happened the next afternoon, if it could even be called that. A clerk from the Lake County office arrived in a government-issued sedan, carrying a briefcase and a stack of neatly printed forms. He was polite enough, but it was clear he had performed this procedure countless times. There was no music, no decorations, no rings carefully chosen or vows written with trembling hands. Only a transaction written on official paper, completed in the quiet stillness of Lancaster Manor's library. The library itself was beautiful, towering shelves, leather-bound volumes, dust motes suspended in thin beams of light. But the ceremony inside it felt hollow. Rachel stood beside Henry at the center of the room, while 2 staff members served as witnesses, their expressions unreadable. The clerk asked the required questions, recorded their signatures, stamped the final page, and offered a brief nod of acknowledgement. "Congratulations," he said in a tone that carried no warmth. Then he left, the sound of the front door closing echoing through the long hallway like a final punctuation mark. No celebration followed, no small gathering, no shared meal. The house remained as silent and cold as it had been when she first arrived. That night, Rachel was escorted to the bedroom that would technically be hers, though Henry's room was down the hall. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped tightly in her lap, the reality of the day settling over her like an invisible weight. A soft knock sounded at the door. Henry stepped inside slowly, leaning on his cane, the oxygen tubing trailing behind him. He looked more drained than usual, as if the short ceremony had taken more energy than his body could spare. "I didn't want you to be alone," he said quietly. Rachel nodded, unsure what she was supposed to feel. Gratitude? Fear? Sadness? All of it mixed into something murky and overwhelming. Henry hesitated, then reached up to disconnect the oxygen line. He removed the mask gently, setting it on the bedside table. Without the medical equipment, the full extent of his illness came into view. His skin looked thin and nearly translucent under the soft lamplight. Surgical scars traced along his jaw and neck, remnants of procedures meant to keep him alive. His breathing deepened, his chest rising and falling with effort. Rachel froze, her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected the stark truth of how fragile he truly was. Henry noticed. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't want you to see me like this so soon." He took a small step back, creating space rather than closing the distance between them. "I know this isn't what you wanted. I know you didn't choose this life. But I promise you, I will never force anything on you. Not now. Not ever." His voice held no bitterness, only exhaustion. And something else, something almost like sorrow. It unsettled her more deeply than the scars or the oxygen tubes. Because for the first time, Rachel realized that Henry wasn't her captor. He was another kind of prisoner, trapped in a failing body, trapped in a house full of silence. And now tied to her by circumstances neither of them could escape. The storm that rolled across Lake Forest that afternoon seemed to arrive with him. Rachel heard the engine before she saw the car, a sharp, expensive growl that echoed through the stone archway of the manor. She stepped into the hallway in time to watch a sleek, dark SUV pull up to the front steps. The doors burst open before the driver even had a chance to move. Martin Lancaster didn't walk into the house so much as invade it. He was older than Henry by several years, but unlike Henry, his body hadn't been worn down by illness. Martin carried himself with the careless confidence of a man used to being feared. His suit was immaculate, his smile too sharp to be pleasant, and his eyes swept the foyer with a predator's ease. "Well, look at you," he said the moment he saw his brother. "Still breathing." "Barely." Henry, leaning on his cane, managed a tired sigh. "Martin, you weren't expected." "That's obvious," Martin smirked, stepping forward to clap a hand on Henry's shoulder hard enough to make him wince. "But someone has to check on you. Make sure you haven't married the nurse or a gold digger to keep you company." Rachel stiffened. Martin's gaze flicked to her, slow, evaluative. "Unkind. So this is the girl." He made a low, mocking whistle. "You're slipping, Henry. At least your last wife pretended to care." Henry's grip tightened on his cane. "You're a guest. Try acting like one." "Guest?" Martin laughed. "Please. This house is half mine. I'll act however I want." He moved past them into the parlor, pouring himself a drink without asking. The staff exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. Rachel hovered near the doorway, sensing trouble but uncertain how close she should stand. Martin swirled the whiskey in his glass. "You know, Rachel," he began casually, "my brother has a long history of buying affection. Affairs, gifts, little arrangements. He's always preferred to pay for what he can't earn." "Enough," Henry snapped, his voice sharp for the first time since Rachel met him. "Oh, don't start," Martin said, waving a hand. "It's not like she doesn't know why she's here." The conversation shifted then, colder, darker. Martin leaned back, eyes glittering with cruelty. "Did Henry tell you about his charming ex-wife?" "Lovely woman. We got along very well." "Very well." His grin widened, especially when Henry was unavailable. Rachel felt the air leave her lungs. Henry closed his eyes as if absorbing a blow. "And your daughter," Martin continued, as though discussing the weather. "Sweet girl. Lost, lonely. Always looking for someone to talk to. I spent time with her too, you know." Henry's cane slipped. He reached for the edge of a table to steady himself. Martin's voice dropped, venomous. "She resented you before she died, Henry. She told me herself. Said she wished she had a different father." Rachel froze. She hadn't meant to overhear. She hadn't meant to be this close. But the words sliced through the room, deep and merciless. Henry whispered, "Please stop." Martin finished his drink, set the glass down with deliberate precision, and gave a satisfied smile. "You've built your whole life on illusions, brother. Someone should tell the girl before she gets too comfortable." Then he left, footsteps echoing through the hallway until the door slammed behind him. Rachel stood shaken, the cruelty she had witnessed settling into her bones. Henry remained in the center of the room, shattered in a way illness had never managed to break him. The atmosphere inside Lancaster Manor never recovered after Martin's departure. The walls seemed to hold the echo of his cruelty, absorbing it, amplifying it. Henry sat in the parlor long after his brother was gone, staring at the floor with a stunned, hollow expression. Rachel stayed nearby, unsure whether to speak or leave him with his grief. Later that evening, Martin returned, not inside, but lingering in the doorway of the parlor with a fresh drink in hand, as though the earlier destruction he caused had only been a warm-up. "So," he said casually, "have you thought about the will?" Henry stiffened. Rachel, who had been inching toward the hallway, paused. Martin stepped farther into the room, circling his brother like someone inspecting a wounded animal. "You've married unexpectedly. You're not exactly in peak health. Seems like a turbulent time for your estate planning." Henry exhaled slowly. "I intend to revise it." "Oh!" Martin raised an eyebrow. "You? Revise it? When?" "You can barely walk to the study without gasping for air." Henry's hand tightened on his cane. "I will sign new documents soon." "Soon," Martin repeated, savoring the word. "Well, paperwork is a funny thing, Henry. So very fragile. And time." He tapped the face of his gold watch. "Time slips faster than you think." Rachel felt a cold pulse travel up her spine. Martin leaned in just enough to make Henry flinch. "Of course, anything could happen before those new papers appear, right? Houses like this have stairs. Kitchens have sharp edges. Hearts fail. Get out," Henry whispered. Martin smiled, slow and poisonous. "I'm only worried about you, brother." Rachel stepped back into the hallway, heart racing. But Martin wasn't done. He followed her out, closing the parlor door behind them with a soft click. "Walk with me for a second," he murmured. Rachel didn't move. Martin leaned close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You're new here, so let me give you a little family education." She swallowed hard. "If Henry dies before signing anything new, you know what happens, right?" She didn't answer. Martin gave a chilling, amused exhale. "You get nothing. Absolutely nothing. You're not protected. You're not secured. You're not even a footnote." His eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "And I," he tapped his chest lightly, "inherit everything. The house, the land, the accounts, every last dollar. All of it falls straight to me." Rachel felt the world tilt slightly. She had known this place held secrets. She had known Henry was vulnerable. But this open, calculated threat was something else entirely. Martin leaned closer, voice dropping into a whisper sharp enough to cut. "So for your sake, dear Rachel, pray that my brother lives long enough to finish those papers." He stepped back with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Pleasant evening." Then he disappeared down the hall as if nothing he said carried consequences. Rachel stood frozen, realization sinking deep into her bones. Danger wasn't just lurking in this house. It was walking its hallways freely, smiling as it passed her. Lancaster Manor always felt too large for the number of people who lived inside it. But Rachel soon realized that nothing in the house truly went unnoticed. Especially not by Mary Lou Harrington. Mary Lou had served the Lancaster family for nearly 4 decades, long enough for her posture to carry the quiet discipline of habit and loyalty. She moved through the hallways with a soft step and an expression that rarely changed. But her eyes missed nothing. They were sharp, steady, and far more alert than her age suggested. Rachel often caught her watching, never rudely, just observantly, as if she were cataloging every shift in the manor's brittle peace. One afternoon, as Rachel passed the open doorway to the laundry room, Mary Lou called her name in a low voice. "Miss Sutton." Rachel paused. "Yes." Mary Lou looked down the hallway to be certain they were alone before stepping closer. Her voice lowered further. "You're not safe here if you trust the wrong people." The words struck Rachel like a cold breeze. Mary Lou folded a towel neatly, her hands moving with practiced calm. "This house has seen things. Arguments, betrayals, secrets that never healed." Her gaze locked on Rachel's. "If you value your peace, trust only Mr. Henry. No one else." Rachel swallowed. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've watched those boys, both of them, since they were young," Mary Lou replied. "I know their hearts. Mr. Henry is kind, but he's fragile. Mr. Martin," she hesitated, searching for the right word, "is a man who enjoys winning, no matter the cost." A chill slipped down Rachel's spine. She thought of Martin's smirk, his threats, the cruel ease with which he spoke about Henry's pain. Mary Lou placed the folded towel on a shelf. "Keep your head down. Be cautious. This house listens." Rachel nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she stepped away. Gratitude and fear tangled tightly in her chest. Gratitude for the warning, fear for why it was necessary. That night, the weight of everything pressed harder than before. After speaking with her parents by phone, Rachel learned her mother's health had taken another downturn. The pain had worsened. The doctor recommended new tests they didn't have the money for. The guilt hit her with brutal force, as if by stepping into Lancaster Manor. She had stepped away from the fight to save her mother. She curled up in the guest room, the bed too big and too cold, the silence stretching endlessly around her. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she tried to breathe through the ache in her chest. She felt torn cleanly in two, one part terrified of Martin, the other anchored to the thought of her parents struggling alone. Between the unfamiliar shadows of the manor and the fading voice of her mother over the phone, Rachel felt smaller than ever, caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. And for the first time since she arrived, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake walking into this house at all. Rachel first met Logan Pierce on a quiet morning when the staff was changing schedules, and the house felt unusually still. He appeared beside her in the hallway with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, hands tucked neatly into the pockets of his tailored vest. Logan had the polished confidence of someone trained to manage people, not just operations. His voice was smooth, his posture relaxed, but something about him set her nerves on edge. "Mrs. Lancaster," he said warmly, "I just wanted to check in. Henry's situation can't be easy for you." Rachel stiffened. "I'm managing." "Are you?" he asked, tilting his head. "I imagine moving here so suddenly must feel overwhelming. New house, New responsibilities. New family dynamics. His tone dripped with sympathy, yet every sentence felt rehearsed, measured, as if he were probing for weakness. Rachel nodded silently, unwilling to share anything with a man whose smile felt manufactured. Logan stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. I've run the Lancaster operations for years. I know this household better than anyone, including Henry. The implication slid across her skin like ice. I appreciate the offer, she said softly, stepping back. Logan smiled again, too smooth, too practiced. Anytime. He disappeared down the corridor, leaving behind a faint scent of cologne and a sense of unease that clung to her for the rest of the day. Later that night, unable to sleep, Rachel wandered toward the back staircase. The manor was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every creak of the floorboard sound amplified. As she passed the half-open door of Henry's old study, voices drifted into the hallway, low, tense, unmistakably heated. She froze. Logan's voice came first, sharp and angry. We had a deal, Martin. You promised me my share once Henry is taken care of. Rachel's blood ran cold. Martin answered with a dismissive scoff. And you'll get it. But not until everything is in motion. You're getting impatient. Impatient? Logan hissed. He's dragging his feet. He's not signing anything. And now you've brought that girl into the house. She complicates everything. She's irrelevant, Martin snapped. Henry's heart is weak. One wrong push and nature will do the work for us. Rachel covered her mouth to keep a gasp from escaping. Logan stepped closer. She could hear his shoes against the hardwood. If he dies before the papers are rewritten, everything goes to you. I want my guaranteed cut. Not a maybe. Martin's answer came slow, amused. Relax. The plan stays the same. Henry dies. I inherit. And once that happens, you'll get what you're owed. Soon, Logan pressed. It needs to be soon. Martin chuckled. It will be. Rachel stumbled back from the doorway, her breath trembling. Their words echoed in her skull, each sentence a knife carving deeper into her fear. This wasn't about inheritance documents. Not about manipulation. Not about legal maneuvering. It was murder. Premeditated. Calculated. Already in motion. And she was trapped in the same house as the men planning it. The shadows of Lancaster Manor suddenly felt alive. Listening, waiting, closing in. Night settled heavily over Lancaster Manor. The kind of night where shadows clung to the walls and every lamp seemed too dim. Rachel walked beside Henry along the upstairs corridor, guiding him back to his room after a long and exhausting day. His breathing was unsteady, each step requiring careful effort. They were halfway down the hallway when a shape detached itself from the darkness ahead. Logan. He stepped forward with slow confidence, blocking the path. His suit was perfectly pressed, his expression cold and deliberate. No more warm smiles, no more feigned sympathy. In his hand, glinting faintly in the low light, was a gun. Rachel's breath froze. Henry clutched his cane. Finally, Logan drawled, locking the door behind them with a soft click. I've been waiting for the right moment. Rachel instinctively stepped in front of Henry. Logan, you don't have to do this. Oh, but I do. He raised the gun slightly, almost casually. Martin and I agreed. Tonight is the night. Henry will take a fall down the grand staircase. A tragic accident. His heart is weak, after all. Nobody will question it. Henry trembled violently. Rachel tightened her grip on his arm. Logan's gaze sharpened, voice dropping into something colder. And you, Rachel, you'll be the witness who tried to help. Tried so hard. He tilted his head. But you slipped too. These old floors, so unpredictable. Rachel's heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat. She forced herself to keep her voice steady. Logan, listen. We can talk. You want security? Money. Tell us what you're owed. Henry can revise the will tomorrow. Logan laughed softly, the sound chilling in its calm. This isn't about discussion. It's about execution, of a plan. And of a man. He stepped closer, the gun now aimed directly at Henry's chest. Henry's legs buckled, and he leaned heavily into Rachel. Please, Henry whispered, his voice barely audible. Don't do this. Logan's face hardened. You should have signed the papers when you had the chance. Rachel raised her hands slowly, palms open. Logan, look at me. Think about this. If anything goes wrong, nothing will go wrong, he interrupted. I've thought this through. He moved closer still. Rachel could smell his cologne, feel the tension coiled in the air, hear Henry's shaky breathing. She tried again, anything to buy a few seconds. You don't have to hurt him, she said softly. You don't have to hurt either of us. There's another way. There isn't, Logan snapped, raising the gun higher. Enough talking. His finger tightened on the trigger. And then, a sharp, sickening crack split through the hall. Logan's eyes widened in confusion. His body swayed for a heartbeat before collapsing forward onto the carpet, the gun skittering across the floor. Behind him stood Mary Lou Harrington. The housekeeper's breath was heavy, her grip tight around a solid brass candle holder darkened by impact. Her expression was pale but fierce, steady in a way that belied her years. "Not in my house," she whispered, voice trembling with controlled fury. Rachel caught Henry just as his knees gave way completely, lowering him gently to the floor. His breaths came in short, panicked bursts, but he was alive. Mary Lou dropped the candle holder with a dull thud, her eyes meeting Rachel's with unspoken urgency. The silence that followed was thick, electric, broken only by Henry's ragged breathing and the distant creak of the old manor settling. The attempt had failed, but the night's danger was far from over. The manor was still vibrating with the echo of chaos when Mary Lou ushered Rachel and Henry into the sitting room and locked the door behind them. Her hands were steady, her breaths controlled, but her eyes were burning with urgency. "I need you both to listen," she said. "The police are already on their way." Rachel blinked. "You called them?" Mary Lou nodded sharply. "An hour ago. I'd heard enough whispers between Logan and Mr. Martin these past weeks to know something was wrong. Tonight confirmed it." She pressed a hand to her chest. "I wasn't going to let this household witness another tragedy." Rachel felt a surge of relief, so intense it nearly brought her to her knees. Henry, pale and trembling, whispered, "Mary Lou, you may have saved our lives." She shook her head. "I did what needed to be done." Within minutes, the manor flooded with the sharp blue-red glow of squad car lights bouncing through the tall windows. Officers moved quickly, securing the hallways, tending to the unconscious Logan, and separating staff for statements. Rachel stayed close to Henry, her hand gripping his tightly as detectives pieced together the shattered threads of the conspiracy. One officer approached them with a laptop. "Mr. Lancaster, we pulled the relevant footage from your security system. It's all here." Mary Lou leaned closer. "The steady camera?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." The detective clicked play. The screen displayed Logan late at night, seated at Henry's desk. He rifled through stacks of papers, selecting specific documents with deliberate care. Then he pulled out a pen and began signing Henry's name, slowly, confidently, as though he had practiced it many times before. Henry inhaled sharply, his grief audible. "Those are my investment accounts," he whispered. "My daughters fund my medical directives," the detective nodded. "There's more." He pulled up another clip, Logan scanning documents into a portable drive, then returning them to the drawer as if untouched. Rachel felt sick. A second officer entered the room. "We reached the bank." "Ms. Harrington," he said, turning to Mary Lou, "your call prevented a very large transfer from going through. It would have emptied an entire trust." Mary Lou's composure cracked for the first time. "I couldn't stand by while they stripped this family bare." Another officer stepped forward. "Logan Pierce is in custody. He'll be charged with attempted murder, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy." Henry closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks, not from fear, but from the weight of what he had just learned. Years of loyalty he believed in, partnerships he trusted, people he treated like family, all of it collapsing in a single night. "And Martin?" Rachel asked quietly. "Apprehended," the detective said. "He tried to leave his home through a side entrance. We brought him in for questioning. He won't go anywhere." The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Henry's shoulders slumped, his cane trembling beneath his hand. "My own brother," he whispered, voice breaking. "All this time." Rachel placed a hand on his back, steadying him, grounding him. The conspiracy had shattered. But so had the remnants of Henry's faith in the family he once believed he had. Winter melted slowly into spring, and with it, the suffocating weight that had pressed on Rachel's shoulders for months finally began to lift. The police reports were completed, the statements filed, and the investigations closed. Logan and Martin would not return. Not to the manor, not to Henry's life, not to the fragile peace he still clung to. For the first time in what felt like forever, Rachel allowed herself to breathe without fear. A week after the arrests, her father called with a kind of trembling relief she hadn't heard in his voice in years. The debt, the cruel, predatory burden that had crushed them, was gone, officially cleared. Investigators had traced it back to the same financial manipulations Logan had been orchestrating for months. With the case now open and his fraudulent network exposed, the loan was declared void. Rachel's mother began receiving proper treatment again. The doctors adjusted her medications, scheduled new tests, and for once, spoke about her prognosis with cautious optimism. Her breathing eased. Her pain subsided. The darkness surrounding their family finally began to thin. Rachel cried when she heard the news, quiet, exhausted tears that felt like a release. Back at Lancaster Manor, Henry's recovery unfolded slowly but steadily. Physical therapists visited 3 times a week, guiding him through careful exercises. At first, he could manage only a few steps with a walker, then a few more. His breathing strengthened. The oxygen equipment became something he used less frequently. His voice regained some of its firmness, though his eyes still carried the bruised softness of someone rebuilding trust in the world. Rachel stayed, not because she owed him anything, not out of debt, pity, or obligation, but because something had shifted between them after the night of the attempt. In the aftermath of fear, a gentler truth had emerged. She genuinely cared for him. For the quiet way he always asked about her parents. For the soft humor that returned as his strength did. For the bravery it took him to face the betrayals that had nearly destroyed him. Lancaster Manor slowly transformed, too. Mary Lou began opening the windows again, letting fresh wind sweep the stale shadows from the rooms. Curtains were washed, furniture rearranged, corners dusted that hadn't seen light in years. The air took on a different quality, less heavy, more alive. Henry walked the hallways each morning, leaning on his cane but no longer trembling. Rachel often walked beside him, matching her pace to his. Sometimes they spoke, other times silence was enough. And Rachel, she began to smile again. Not the polite, strained smiles she used to hide her fear, but real ones, small, warm, genuine. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the lake, painting the stone walls in amber, Rachel stood at one of the tall windows and watched Henry make his slow, determined way through the garden with Mary Lou at his side. His steps were careful, but they were steady. She felt something settle inside her, something quiet and deeply human. No grand victory had arrived, no dramatikendino, no sweeping justice that erased the past. Just peace, just safety, just the first hint of real healing. And for Rachel, after everything that had happened, that was more than enough.